Perfect competition. In this microeconomics presentation, I will look into a competition form, more precisely, perfect competition. I'm going to go in depth for what is perfect competition. So here you can see the table of contents. You can see what I will go through throughout the whole presentation. I'll start to look at what is it in the introduction, tell you more about that before we go to how perfect competition works, look at different aspects of it, and I'll go through that in different slides. Before we'll go a bit into special considerations regarding this and criticism of perfect competition. Then we'll look at, do firms really profit in perfect competition? And we'll specific examples of perfect competition. Quite a few different ones. Go through, then and now. A good answer of what is perfect competition. So, could anyone tell me what is perfect competition? Tell me in other words and what is written in the slide right now. If not, no worries, because we'll learn more about that very soon. Start by looking at what was here in the slide. This is according to financial writer Adam Hayes. He says the term perfect competition refers to theoretical market structure. And in a perfect competition model, there are no monopolies. Not a single monopoly. How does perfect competition work? Perfect competition is a benchmark or ideal type in which real-life market structures can be compared. Perfect competition is theoretically the opposite of a monopoly, in which only a single firm supplies a good or service, and that firm can charge whatever it wants since consumers have no alternative. It is difficult for would-be competitors to enter the marketplace. Under perfect competition, there are many buyers and sellers, and prices reflect supply and demand. Companies earn just enough profit to stay in business and no more. If they were to earn excess profit, other companies would enter the market and drive profits down. A large and homogeneous market. Homogeneous could be a new word for you guys, and that means something is kind of same kind, that it is alike. So in a homogeneous market, products traded are more or less the same really. It is as simple as that. So there are a large number of buyers and sellers in a perfectly competitive market. The sellers are small firms instead of large corporations capable of controlling prices through supply adjustment. They sell products with minimal differences in capabilities, features, and pricing. This ensures that buyers cannot distinguish between products based on physical attributes such as size or color, or intangible values such as branding. A large population of both buyers and sellers ensures that supply and demand remain constant in this market. As such, buyers can easily substitute products made by one firm for another. Over to perfect information availability. Information about an industry's ecosystem and competition forms a significant advantage. For example, knowledge about component sourcing and supplier pricing can make or break the market for a certain amount of companies. In certain knowledge and research intensive industries such as pharmaceuticals and technology, information about patients and research initiatives at competitors can help companies develop competitive strategies and build a moat around their products, really. And the availability of free and equal information in a perfectly competitive market ensures that each firm can produce its goods or services at exactly the same rate and with the same production techniques as another one in the market. Now, look a bit at absence of controls. Governments they play a vital role in market formation for products by imposing regulations and price controls. It can control the entry and exit of firms into market, setting up rules to function in the market. For example, the pharmaceutical industry has to contend with a roster of rules pertaining to the development, production, and sale of drugs. In turn, these rules require big capital investments in the form of employees, such as lawyers and quality assurance personnel, and infrastructure, such as machinery, manufacture medicines. And accumulated costs add up, make it extremely expensive for companies to bring a drug to the market. In comparison, the technology industry functions with relatively less oversight as compared to its pharma counterpart. Though entrepreneurs in this industry can start firms with less zero capital, this makes it easy for individuals to start a company in the industry. Such controls do not exist in a perfectly competitive market though. The entry and exit of firms in such a market are unregulated. This frees them up to spend on labor and capital assets without restrictions and adjust their output in relation to market demands. So cheap and effective transportation, or cheap and efficient transportation. That is another characteristic of perfect competition. And in this type of market, companies do not incur significant costs to transport goods. And this helps reduce the product's price and cuts back on delays in transporting goods. And this clearly benefits the whole society without a doubt. And this is something that we need more of. Special considerations. Real-world competition differs from this ideal primarily because of differentiation in production, marketing, and selling. For example, the owner of a small organic product shop can talk extensively about the grain fed to the cows that made the fertilizer that fertilized the non-GMO soybeans. And this is what's called differentiation, really. That's what it's about. And the first two criteria, homogeneous products and price takers, they're far from realistic. But yeah, for the second two criteria, information and mobility, the global tech and trade transformation is improving information and resource flexibility. And while the reality is far from this theoretically model, the model is still helpful because of its ability to explain many real life behaviors. Oh yeah. So there are also some disadvantages of perfect competition, naturally. And perfect competition establishes an idealized framework for establishing a market. But that market is flawed and has a couple of disadvantages. The first one is the absence of innovation. The prospect of a greater market share and setting themselves apart from the competition is incentive for firms to innovate and make better products. But no firm possesses a dominant market share, perfect competition. No one does that. No firm. And profit margins they are also fixed by demand and supply. So firms cannot set themselves apart by charging a premium for the product and services. For instance, it would be impossible for a company like Apple to exist in a perfectly competitive market because its phones are pricier, more expensive than its competitors. And another disadvantage, the absence of economies of scale. Limited to zero profit margins, that means that companies will have less cash to invest in expanding their production capabilities. An expansion of production capabilities could potentially bring down costs for consumers and increase business profit margins, but the presence of several small firms cannibalizing the market for the same product prevents this and ensures that the average firm size remains small. So, do firms profit? I actually talked a bit about this earlier in the presentation, so may know the answer to it, but I'll go a bit more in depth of it now. I'm really looking at it. So, profits, they may be possible for brief periods in perfectly competitive markets, but the market's dynamics cancel out the effects of positive or negative profits and bring them toward an equilibrium. So, because there is no information asymmetry in the market, other firms will quickly ramp up their production or reduce their manufacturing costs to achieve parity with the firm which made profits. An average revenue and marginal revenue for firms in a perfectly competitive market are equal to the product's price to the buyer. And as a result, the perfectly competitive market's equilibrium, which had been disrupted earlier, will be restored. And in the long run, an adjustment of supply and demand ensures all profits or losses in such markets tend towards zero. So, as mentioned earlier, perfect competition is a theoretical construct and doesn't actually exist. As such, it is difficult to find real-life examples of perfect competition, but there are variants present in everyday society. And we start by looking at these. Consider the situation at a farmer's market, a place characterized by a large number of small sellers and buyers. There is typically little differentiation between products and their prices from one farmer's market to another, and how the product is grown doesn't matter, and there's very little difference in how they're packaged or branded. So even if one of the farms producing goods for the market goes out of business, it will not make a difference to average prices. Another example that we see in everyday life is supermarkets. So the situation may also be relatively similar in the case of two competing supermarkets which stock their aisles from the same set of companies. Again, there's little distinguished products from one another between both supermarkets, and their pricing remains almost the same. And another example of perfect competition is the market for unbranded products, which features cheaper versions of well-known products. Knockoffs is another example, and product knockoffs are generally priced similar, and there's little to differentiate them from one to another. If one of the firms manufacturing such a product goes out of business, it is replaced by another one. Last, we'll look at technology as an example of perfect competition. So, Development of new markets in the technology industry also remembers perfect combination to a certain degree. For example, there was a proliferation of sites offering similar services during the early days of social media networks. Some examples of such sites are 60degrees.com, like Planet.com, and none of them had a dominant market share, and the sites were mostly free. They constituted sellers in the market, while consumers of such sites were mainly young people, were the buyers. The startup costs for companies in this space were minimal, meaning that startups and companies can freely enter and exit these markets. Technologies such as Java were largely open source and available to anyone. Capital costs in form of real estate and infrastructure, they were not necessary. Just think about Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg. He started the company from his college dorm. That is pretty crazy to think about. So, even though that perfect competition is a theoretical construct, it doesn't actually exist, you can still see real life examples of it that we see like more or less every day in society. And I think that is pretty fascinating in many ways. So, then take a look at this again. What is perfect competition? And in economic theory, perfect competition occurs when all companies sell identical products, when market share does not influence price, and companies can enter or exit without barrier. And it occurs when buyers have perfect or full information. Companies cannot determine prices. When that does happen, it's perfect competition. So, in other words, it is a market that is entirely influenced by market forces. And this is the opposite of imperfect competition, which is a more accurate reflection of a current market structure. So, last thing I will say is just what is an example of perfect competition? Then again, let's consider a farmer's market where each vendor sells the same type of jam. There's still differentiation between each of their products as they use the same recipe and they each sell them at an equal price. At the same time, sellers are few and free to participate in the market without any barrier. Buyers in this case will be fully knowledgeable of the product's recipe. Any other information relevant to the good. I'll end it by saying that that is an example of perfect competition. It really is. And this is the sources that I used. I looked at Khan Academy for a few videos of the topic. So you're to really get a good knowledge of what competition forum was. Then I looked into Wikipedia for some terms and found another source. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for your attention, everybody.